Hello, everyone. My name is Deepa Majumdar, and this is part 2 of my presentation on abortion. Last week, I presented part 1, which covered the whole idea of motherhood, responsible sexual conduct, and the whole issue of rights. So today, what I'm covering is the whole idea of abortion, beginning with asking what the nature of the fetus is. Because abortion debates usually presuppose ideas and thoughts and perceptions and assumptions and assertions about about the nature of the fetus. So we've already talked about the mother, but now it's time to talk about the fetus. So let me begin by saying that anything I say in today's presentation, like in part 1 last week, is really my view and does not. So it's a disclaimer, does not represent the views of the institution I work for, which is Purdue University Northwest. So let me begin with the whole idea of the fetus. On the fetus, I really have this conviction that the fetus is a who and not a what. I know in this day and age of body consciousness, and it's a somatic age that we're living in, we reduce even the born to their bodies. So leave alone the not yet born, like the fetus. But if we go by the whole idea of reincarnation, then the fetus is ensouled, not just ensouled, but ensouled from the very first moment of its life in the womb. This includes the embryo. The fetus is not yet, the ensoulment is not yet manifested. It gets manifested gradually as the fetus gains consciousness. And with the consciousness of the fetus comes the development of its body. The more conscious the fetus is, the more its body evolves and the more its innate ensoulment is manifested. So in the sense of innate ensoulment, the fetus possesses innate personhood. So I think of the fetus as possessing 2 levels of personhood. The first is this innate personhood drawn from ensoulment, even if it's not manifested, so that this implies that even aborting an embryo, which is a completely different level altogether than a late-term abortion, nevertheless sullies the dignity of human nature or human life at all, because that embryo is not a potential person, but is already ensouled and is already a person. And so I don't think of the fetus as a potential person for a minute, okay? But there's a second level that confers personhood on the fetus, and this is in the ideal case scenario. I'm not speaking of rape survivors, but in the ideal case where a child is welcomed and wanted, the fetus is basically the mother loves her fetus, and the mother's love, even if subjective, but because it's altruistic, I think confers a certain degree of objectivity that then adds and enriches the already existing innate personhood in the fetus. And so it adds a layer of personhood. This, because the mother's love for a child, I think is not innate or instinctive. For a minute, I don't believe in a mother's child bond being an instinct. So if we go to the opposite end of the spectrum and we speak of the rape survivor, who feels an understandable revulsion for her fetus, this mother-child bond is simply not there. So, but when it is there in ideal case scenarios, then it certainly adds to the fetus's innate personhood. And when it's not there, or when there's revulsion instead of the bond for the fetus from the mother, for, like I said, for understandable reasons, in the case of a rape survivor, that revulsion doesn't take away from the personhood of from the innate personhood of the fetus. So the fetus has this innate personhood, which is what makes, abortion is wrong. No, I don't think abortion is wrong. The innate personhood of the fetus certainly is grounds for abortion being wrong. Abortion is distinct from miscarriage, but abortion is an act of violence. So moving on from the fetus, let's first define abortion and distinguish it from infanticide. Abortion is a act of willful termination of the life of a fetus. It comes through varying techniques, whether medical or surgical. It comes at varying stages, whether the embryonic stage or, in the first trimester, second trimester, so on and so forth. But whatever it be, and suddenly the level of violence is different between removing an abortion at the embryonic stage versus an abortion at a later stage. But it does inflict violence on the fetus at two levels. One is it robs the fetus of life, and it robs it also of post-birth potential life. So the fetus is not a potential person. It is already a person, but abortion robs it of its potential post-birth life plus of its actual life. That's the first level of violence. But the second level is the possibility of fetal pain in late-term abortions in particular. And fetal pain is maybe a medical controversy, but I think from a philosophical standpoint, the experience of pain is to an extent subjective, and people have different thresholds of pain. And what an adult human being can do, which is control pain, not just through painkillers, but also through wisdom, self-control, forbearance, etc., is something a fetus can't do because it's so helpless. So alongside defining the fetus as a person, I think we should also point to its actual empirical situation. And this is well worth not discussing as much as asserting that the fetus is a very helpless being. It is ultimately helpless and completely reliant on its mother's body for its life. So let's not forget that for a minute. So basically, that said, fetus, so basically abortion and infanticide are two different things. And here I don't make any distinction between killing and letting die. I find that distinction troubling and a sign of our times. We're living in a culture of death rather than a culture of life. Letting die is a passive form of killing, and so I'm just aghast at where we are today, where love, and I don't mean romantic love, I mean humanism, love and care and compassion, I mean, these have flown out of the window, and we're now speaking the language of killing and letting die. But whether it's abortion or infanticide, both are forms of violence against very helpless beings. If at all one can compare the two, abortion in a way is worse because it confronts us with terrible moral controversies. But all that said, the fact is that abortion has always happened, is happening, will happen. So even if it becomes illegal, that doesn't mean abortion is going to go away. So then what then is, for want of a better term, acceptable? Where do we draw the boundary? So I can think of two cases where abortion is defensible. I'm not saying is recommended, but defensible. And so these are, number one, in a case of a loving mother, the best case scenario of a loving mother longing for her child, which then turns into a nightmare because she's told, and even worse of a nightmare, if she's told this towards the end of her pregnancy, that it's either your life or that of your baby. And so she has to make this choice between her own life and that of her fetus. That's the first case where abortion is defensible. And the second case is one where abortion is a necessary evil. Is the case of the rape survivor, who, if she doesn't undergo an abortion, she'd have to undergo coerced pregnancy and coerced motherhood, and so on and so forth. I'm not bringing in as yet the case of fetuses with fatal or non-fatal health issues. Okay, and we'll deal with that later. But I'd also like to backtrack a little bit on the whole idea of abortion as violence towards the fetus being morally wrong, because it's an act of violence that robs the fetus of life and potential for post-birth life, as well as because it might inflict pain. I'd like to add to this two things. Number one, that that the pain of the fetus may be a moral quandary. I've already said this, but philosophically pain varies, and so on and so forth. But even if pain were removed medically, even if one could, medically anesthetize the fetus before robbing it of its life, that doesn't make abortion any less heinous. I mean, it makes it maybe a tad less in the sense that fetal pain has been removed, but it's still robbing it of life. But there's another reason why abortion is wrong, which is that it militates against the cosmic principle of motherhood. I spoke about this in part 1. It really militates against the cosmic principle of motherhood. And here I would like to bring in Mother Teresa, who said, who spoke for the unborn when she protested abortion, saying that, and I paraphrase very roughly, that if a mother can take the life of her child, how can we stop people from killing each other? That's well and good in cases of abortions of convenience, selfish abortions, abortions used to remove female fetuses, abortion used as a weapon of eugenics. So it's Mother Teresa's words fit in perfectly there. But I wish Mother Teresa had understood better the whole nuances of motherhood. And the fact that motherhood gets betrayed very often, the cosmic principle of motherhood is not always manifested in all cases of motherhood. Motherhood is horribly betrayed when the fetus is conceived in violence. That's the greatest betrayal of motherhood. But also when the mother is abused, sexually assaulted, neglected, or if she's poor, doesn't have enough food, or if she is being forced to give birth until she produces a son, or if she is being robbed of her daughters through infanticide. All these are horrific betrayals of motherhood. And so because motherhood comes in this wide range, abortion sometimes becomes a necessary evil. So here I'd like to add that even in the 2 defensible cases, abortion is not just a necessary evil. First of all, let me define what necessary evil means, and then I'll get to the second point. So a necessary evil is basically evil necessitated by the rational anticipation of a good outcome. In the case of the mother whose life is at stake, the anticipated good outcome is through the abortion, the mother's life would be saved. In the case of the rape survivor, the anticipated good outcome is that the rape survivor mother would not be forced to go through pregnancy and motherhood. But let me also add that both these defensible cases come with their own, each is a moral dilemma. In the first case of the mother's life versus the fetus's life, this dilemma is a little more balanced because it's a conflict of lives. I don't use the term conflict of interest because its interests sound very inappropriate here. We're speaking of a fatal conflict here. So it's a conflict of lives. And so it's not quite balanced because the fetus and the mother are not equal in a way. In a way, the fetus is much more helpless. In a way, the mother is, already in existence. I don't know that should prioritize her life necessarily, but that, certainly that's the way the thing is that if the mother's life is taken, and involuntarily to save the fetus, that becomes enormously sexist and misogynist. So I'm not saying necessarily that the mother has more personhood than the fetus, because personhood is innate and the mother's personhood too is innate. But the point is, so I'm not speaking the hedonistic language of the mother already has life and desires and all of that, but I'm speaking rather in terms of right to life. That right to life should be equal. But nevertheless, when it is a mother's life versus a fetus's, it is the non-sexist thing to do is to prioritize the mother's life over the fetus's. And this is roughly balanced because it's a contest between 2 lives. It's one of those great tragedies, existential tragedies of life. But the second conflict is a little more imbalanced because on the one hand, you have the fetus who's being put to death. On the other hand, you have the rape survivor mother who, this too is a moral dilemma, but it's a little more imbalanced because the dilemma is between the fetus and the risk to its life vis-a-vis the rape survivor mother being forced to bear a child and undergo motherhood. I don't know that coercing motherhood and pregnancy is the equal of taking a life. Now, there are great and noble rape survivors, like in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I once read of rape survivors who have said of their fetuses that my child has already been wronged once by being conceived in violence. I'm not going to wrong it again by aborting it. That's a very noble stance, worthy of the greatest accolades out there. But it cannot and should not be generalized, nor should rape survivors who do not go for that option and opt for abortion be judged morally. They're not evil by no means. They're just human. Anyone who goes through the trauma of rape is certainly going to feel a revulsion for the fetus, and that's unfair to the fetus, because no fetus asks to be born out of violence. That is completely unfair to the fetus. Unjust to the fetus, more than unfair. But nevertheless, this is the reality, and rape survivors are certainly, the usual expectation is that they will feel a revulsion for the fetus. If the glory of motherhood and the cosmic principle of motherhood intervenes to redeem that, as in the case of the women I spoke of before from DRC, then that's well and good. That's wonderful. That's saintly. But one can't expect everyone to be a saint. That's unfair to the people we're forcing to be saints. And so the second kind of defensible case of abortion is also a moral dilemma. And so, but a relatively imbalanced one. And so that's as far as the conflict of lives is concerned. I'd like to move on now to the topic of abortion and misogyny. And I'd like to say that it's not just pro-life that can be misogynist, but also pro-choice. So the thing with ethics is that sometimes the ethics of a procedure or a practice depends on the empirical situation at hand. The same action, which in one empirical context can be evil, in another can be a necessary evil. In a third could even be good. Where abortion is concerned, I think abortion ranges from pure evil, as in the case of aborting female fetuses, or any kind of genocidal abortion. And at the other extreme, at the highest level, abortion is a necessary evil and a dilemma, moral dilemma. But so within this range, or rather notwithstanding this range, abortion can be misogynist, when it is applied in a patriarchal context and used against women. So one example would be although it's illegal in India, but the mass-scale abortion of female fetuses is abortion being used as a patriarchal ploy, and so that's pro-choice, but sexist. Pro-choice being used for a sexist purpose. Pro-life becomes sexist or misogynist when the mother's life is subordinated to that of the fetus. And when a woman is thereby reduced just to her womb, that's violent towards women, and that is definitely misogynist as well. So, I've often wondered why males in particular in positions of power in public offices, but sometimes women too, engage in this type of misogyny to control the womb. And here I have a theory. It may sound wild, so bear with me here. I feel like maybe some of these men who are extremely sexist are basically identifying too closely with masculinity, number one, and also with the fetus, and fear that in the hands of women, masculinity might become jeopardized if women engage in aborting male fetuses. This is like it's like a dystopia, a gender dystopia, and it may sound ludicrous, but in the minds of very extremely misogynist men, it might be this fear that they're identifying too closely with masculinity and with the fetus and thinking by aborting that fetus, she's aborting me and my kind, my bodily kind. And I don't think this fear, if it does exist, can be washed off by feminist rage alone, because abortion is playing God. It's playing God in the sense of a mother being able to decide whether or not her fetus lives. So there's no getting away from that. But that said, I don't think this kind of misogyny should be encouraged for a minute, nor can the solution lie in coercing pregnancies in rape survivors, nor can it lie in forcing a mother to forfeit her life for the sake of her fetus. And finally, nor can it lie in making abortion illegal. So even though abortion is abhorrent, I'm against making abortion illegal, because then we may go back to I think we will go back to the horrors of back alley abortions. Even with abortion legal, abortion can be a very traumatic experience, not just physically, when, under unsanitary conditions, etc., but it's our collective memory still remembers the horrors of back alley abortions, which are prevalent even under conditions of legal abortion today, where women, especially unmarried women, are sometimes hectored. They're scolded, they're shamed, they're abused mentally for perceived sexual transgressions. And so, we don't want women dying through botched abortions and back alley abortions. And so I think this kind of misogyny is something to really quell. But moving on with abortion, I think abortion is not only abhorrent, but a very great tragedy of our times, and fundamentally immoral, but sometimes a necessary evil. Also because it can lead to further problems like genocidal forms of eugenics, where abortion is used to abort female fetuses, for example, or for race reasons. One never knows. Under a fascist kind of scenario, abortions might be coerced to remove certain fetuses of certain race groups. So that's one potential where abortion can be very dangerous. The other is the whole idea of euthanasia for fetuses that are either terminally ill or have serious health issues. I have a huge problem with that, because those who are sick, especially beings as helpless as the fetus, deserve our love and care. And that's what aligns with the cosmic principle of motherhood. Even in the case of a fatally ill patient, a fetus, I think not just the mother, but the world owes it love and care, and at the very least owes it, so it's not tormenting the fetus to have it be born only so it can die, but it's granting it the dignity of a human being. And that death can be arranged under proper perinatal hospice conditions, where the fetus is taken care of, the mother's taken care of. Again, none of this can be mandated legally or morally. It has to be chosen. But that is the second danger that abortion can lead to. The first being genocidal form of eugenics, and the second being euthanasia. So my conclusion then is that I think we've grown too clever for our own good. Because of the natural sciences and technology, we are playing God. We ignore providence. There was a time when people said that every child comes into the world with its own loaf of bread. It takes a lot of faith to believe that a child is bringing a whole destiny with it, and no matter what the ailments be, you still give birth to the child and try and raise it. There was a time when loss of a child was an unbearable pain. I would compare that with the loss of a fetus for a mother who wants her child. I don't think the mother-child bond can be scheduled. It begins, with the fetus. I mean, to the world, the fetus might be a fetus, but to the mother, it's her child. And loss of a fetus can be as agonizing as loss of a child. In my life, I've had to console. I remember two cases. One case was that of a mother being forced to abort her fetus just to save her own life, and she was inconsolable. She wept and wept and wept. And the second was the case of her mother who went through a miscarriage. I mean, to the world, it's just a miscarriage, but to her, it was the loss of a child. And so I think we forget these things in our, I call it, and I'm borrowing this from one of our great thinkers, that we've become intelligent. Today we possess intelligence without holiness. And that's the intelligence that comes with the amoral sciences and technology. They're not, and science in no way is science qualified to guide us morally. And although I'm all for science and all for the scientific spirit, I don't think science can guide us on higher moral issues. And so we do need to gain some humility that there is such a thing as providence. We should not be playing God. I don't think death even occurs through willful human hands necessarily. Death occurs when death is supposed to occur. So even in a case of murder, for example, the murderer would not succeed in killing his or her victim if it were not meant to be already, is what I'm trying to say. And so I think we need to step back and recognize our limitations. We also need to return to the cosmic principle of motherhood. As I said in part one, abortion presupposes certain types of sexual conduct. And while I'm completely against any kind of hectoring, preaching, scolding, women for their sexual practices, that's their business. It's nobody else's business. Nevertheless, the fetus should not have to forfeit its life because the parents were engaged in sexual conduct that did not take into consideration the possibility of the fetus. So I think we need to return to responsible forms of sexual conduct. I'm not speaking of the highest virtue here. The highest virtue would be self-control. A return to marital chastity and higher forms of chastity, which grant, which elevate us on the great chain of being and distinguish us from animals, because we are capable of that kind of chastity. And I think the plight of the fetus should inspire us in the direction of that kind of chastity. But I don't think its time has arrived as yet historically. And so the Supreme Court's decision, which need not necessarily ban abortions, but would make it illegal and enforceably illegal in states with trigger laws, I think is untimely, because the sexual revolution has not gone away. It's not waned historically as yet. So unwanted births are happening, will happen, will continue to happen. And, especially rape survivors, especially young rape survivors, shouldn't have to travel miles to get a safe legal abortion. So this is where I'd like to end my presentation. And again, like I said at the end of part one, I don't expect anyone to enjoy my presentations because the topic is so sad, but I hope I've been of at least the slightest use to you, my audience. And so thank you so much for listening. And I hope that that life improves for the mother and the fetus both. Thank you again.